Hello everybody, I'm Sarah and I'm a recorder player. Today's video is all about flutter tongue. How to learn how to roll your R's and roll your throat if you can't already, and then how to apply it to your recorder playing. Flutter tongue is a kind of colouring used in a lot of music, contemporary music mainly. Composers love it. As soon as you show a composer you can flutter tongue, they're like, ah! Flutter tongue can be done in two ways. With your tongue, that's the main one, but also the guttural flutter, and that is with your throat. And in the recorder they sound like this. Tongue, throat. Whether you can flutter your tongue or your throat will depend very much on your native language. If you speak Dutch or Arabic or Hebrew, then you're very lucky because you can do the very easily. If you speak French or Spanish or basically any language other than English, that will be no problem, maybe. If you're British, it's almost always the flutter tongue version that is discussed. But as a British person growing up speaking English, this rolling R was impossible for me, and actually I only learned to do it a couple of years ago. So I have always used the guttural flutter. In my opinion, the flutter tongue is a texture, it's a colour, and if you can achieve that desired texture with the throat or with the tongue, it's up to you. I have never worked with a composer who has been like, is that the throat flutter instead of the tongue? No one has ever noticed, and because I can control the throat flutter just as well as any tongue flutter, I've always been completely fine with doing that. But I want to give you the tools to do both of them so that you have everything at your disposal. First, we are going to prepare our tongues by licking the roof of your mouth. You're going to lick the roof of your mouth from back to front. So if this is the roof and this is your tongue, so you're going to lick like, and around here, where the tip of your tongue is curled and on the roof of your mouth, just behind your teeth, that's where we're going to stop. And for me, that is optimal flutter tongue position. The important thing to remember with the flutter tongue, it's only the very, very, very tip of the tongue that flutters. Your tongue is a massive muscle. It's like a big piece of meat resting in your mouth, and if you're going to try and flutter all of that, then good luck. There are actually two ways that I found useful for preparing a flutter tongue. The first is learning how to do what I call the European R. Now, as an English person, I say R like this, R. In a lot of other languages, the R is actually done with a light flick of the tongue. Ra, 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 ra. This can be really useful in flutter tongue. So we're going to take the word bread. Bread. But instead of going brad, brad, you're going to do the R with a little ra. Let's go from bread to beded. Beded, 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 beded. After a while you'll notice that the beded, that r, has become a bit of an R. Beded, beded, bread, 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 bread. How I got from this to actually flutter tongue was by doing a kind of sigh, and while sighing passing a lot of air over my tongue. And at a certain point, it just fluttered. Bread, bread. It took a while. It didn't happen immediately. And the first time it happened, I was like, if you have found the flutter tongue, then freeze and think, what is actually happening there? And try it again. Another way I found flutter tongue is by saying zzz. Now that is with this part of your tongue, the kind of middle, and you're going to take that tension and move it forward to the tip. You're moving the zzz from the middle to the tip of your tongue, and in that way a flutter can occur. So my tongue is flat, and as I'm moving it, I'm curling it upwards, and as the tip of my tongue touches the roof of my mouth, it begins to flutter. I find that by passing a lot of air over my tongue, it kind of lubricates the whole process and makes the flutter tonguing easier. Of course, this is very unhandy for playing the recorder, where you want to be supporting and controlling the amount of air you're pushing out. So this is like a little step to make it easier. I found in the beginning with the tongue flutter that I had to start it with a really strong articulation, like a and it took a lot of practice to get it to start from nothing. And I find that starting from nothing can help if you use like a ha. And just a few other tips for while you're doing the flutter tongue. Good firm air support. The tongue is quite high in your mouth with the sides touching the inside of your teeth. Do not let any air leak out through your nose. If necessary, practice like this. And the back and the middle of your tongue should be very relaxed. It's only the very tip that is curled up on the top of your palate, and that's the part that's fluttering. Now that you have your flutter, let's practice it in some rhythms. So that's the tongue flutter. Let's look at the guttural or the throat flutter. So let's find out where that is. Say for me, ha, ha, that's very low. And say for me, k, 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 k. That's the back but quite high. Okay, we are aiming for in the middle of this region. This is a really handy way of finding it from Walter von Hauwe, the Modern Recorder Player Book 3, which, as you will see, I have now repurchased. The area of your throat you're aiming for is the, for example, the Dutch ch or the Scottish ch. To find that, we're going to take the word hawk. Hawk. And just before saying the K, kind of freeze and feel where your throat is. It might have closed a little bit, and we're going to use that tension to basically you want to sound like you're coughing up a hairball. That is the area of your throat, but you're using all of it now, and we're going to hone it to a very fine point in the centre. It can help to use the voice. And the idea is to get it very finely tuned. A good word to practice both of these is the Dutch word brug, which means bridge. So the R is the tongue flutter and the G is the throat flutter. Brug, 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 brug. Once you've located your flutter, a lot of building up of practice is needed. You don't have to sit in your chair going because that might make you feel a little bit odd. I recommend putting on a song and just fluttering along to it. Now you have your flutter, you can hold it for say 8 beats quite steadily. Let's put it with the recorder. First thing we're going to do is play a long note, and then we're going to turn our flutter on and off, and you're going to aim that this is very precise. You can choose exactly when to stop and start it, and that the overall air pressure doesn't raise or drop too much. This one I find especially difficult with the flutter tongue, to really start it without pushing with an articulation. In that case, it can be easier to start the whole exercise with the flutter, and then your tongue is already in position. If you hear any voice creeping in, like that means that your throat is starting to tense up, so stop. I had my wisdom tooth taken out 2 days ago and that hurt. And looking at turning that flutter tongue on and off, we're going to take a passage like this. And you're going to flutter alternate notes. Now I was articulating every note, but let's do it also legato. So you're just turning the flutter on and off, but you're not starting each note with the tongue. And of course for this you can make up your own patterns. In order to use flutter tonguing optimally in your playing, it's really important to realise that your airstream and your tongue are independent from one another. Because when you can control each of these independently, the possibilities for making variations in colour and texture are enormous. Now we're going to manipulate our air and the tongue separately. You can decrease or increase the air by blowing more or less. You can increase or decrease the flutter tongue by tensing or relaxing your tongue. Okay, we're going to take the E. I like this because it's a very strong note that you can really blow with. First, we're going to start the note with the flutter tongue. You're going to keep the flutter tongue constant, but you're going to increase and decrease the air. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to flip it around. Your airstream is just going to be no fluctuation, but your tongue is going to do tension and release, and that's going to move the intensity around. All right, first in one big wave. Take your time to practice this, and eventually you can manipulate them both at the same time. You can manipulate them in counterpoint, so you get a kind of crossfade. Sometimes you want to make a very smooth transition from no flutter to flutter, and then for me it helps to think of the air coming up right down from the bottom of my belly and thinking do composers notate flutter tongue? Well, a lot of them notate it in very different ways. Some of them actually just write flutter tongue. Some of them write it in German, FLUTTERTONGUE, and some of them write FLZ, which is the German flutter tongue. Some of them write a note with lots of little dashes on it. In the piece Gesti by Luciano Berio, you actually have a few different types of flutter tongue. You have the throat flutter, signified by a T, and you have the tongue flutter, signified by some lines, and there's also a little white circle that means with air sound. Gesti is a really nice piece where all these different variations and gradations of flutter tonguing come into play. For example, we had a very breathy and soft flutter tongue, and a very breathy and soft throat flutter tongue. And there's a great moment where it goes from voice to throat flutter to tongue flutter to an articulation as if the music is kind of regurgitating out of your stomach. Do you have more questions about flutter tongue? It's quite a big subject and it's quite an abstract one because it's a lot of things that are happening inside your mouth. So if you have questions or if you have tips that I've not covered here, please tell me about them. You can write it all in the comments here. Subscribe to my channel and then more recorder related videos will be coming every week. Thanks for watching, bye!